name is Diana, and this happened to me about 3 years ago. I was 28 at the time, working as a graphic designer in Portland. I had to take a business trip to Seattle for a client meeting, and like an idiot, I booked the cheapest option I could find. That turned out to be an overnight train that left Portland at 11:47 p.m. and was supposed to arrive in Seattle around 6:30 in the morning. I'm not usually one to travel alone at night, but money was tight, and I figured a train would be safer than driving by myself through the mountains in the dark. Looking back, I was incredibly naive. The train was one of those older models with narrow aisles and compartments that felt cramped, even when they weren't full. When I boarded, there were maybe 30 or 40 other passengers scattered throughout the car. Nothing unusual. A few business travelers like myself, some college kids, an elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle. I found my seat about halfway down the car by a window. The upholstery was this faded blue fabric that smelled faintly of cigarettes and industrial cleaner. I settled in with my laptop, planning to get some work done during the ride. About 20 minutes after we left the station, the conductor came through to check tickets. He was probably in his 50s, average height, with graying hair and thick-rimmed glasses. His name tag said Walsh. Nothing about him seemed particularly memorable at first. But then, maybe an hour into the trip, he came back. He approached my seat and leaned down slightly, speaking in this quiet, almost apologetic tone. "Mom, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've had a slight issue with the heating system in this car. Would you mind moving to the car behind us?" I looked around. The temperature seemed fine to me, and no one else was being asked to move. But I didn't want to be difficult, so I gathered my things and followed him to the next car. This one was nearly identical to the first, just a little emptier. Maybe 15 people instead of 30. About an hour later, Conductor Walsh appeared again. Same apologetic smile, same quiet tone. "I'm sorry, miss, but we're having some electrical issues in this car now. For your safety, I am going to need to move you one more time." This time I hesitated. "Are you moving everyone?" "Just the passengers in this section," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the front of the car. I looked around and realized he was right. There were still other passengers in the car, but they were all seated toward the back. I was the only one in the front section. When had that happened? Against my better judgment, I followed him to a third car. This one was significantly emptier, maybe 6 or 7 people total, all of them either asleep or absorbed in their phones. The lighting was dimmer too, just a few overhead bulbs casting long shadows between the seats. "This should be your final stop," Walsh said, with that same polite smile. "No more disruptions for the rest of the night." But I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy now. 3 moves in 3 hours, each time to a more isolated car. I waited until Walsh had moved on, then got up and walked toward the back of the car, pretending to look for the bathroom. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door leading to the car I'd just come from was locked. Not just closed locked. I tried the handle twice to be sure. I walked to the front of the car and tried that door too. Also locked. I was trapped. Around 2:30 a.m., most of the other passengers in the car had fallen asleep. Despite my anxiety, I found my eyelids getting heavy and I must have dozed off. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of hushed voices. "Should be ready in about an hour," an unfamiliar voice was saying. "Good," Walsh replied. "She's been cooperative so far. No problems. What about the others?" "What others?" "She's the only one left. I felt my blood turn to ice water. I opened my eyes just a crack and looked around the car. It was completely empty, except for me. Every other passenger was gone. The voices were getting closer. Through my barely open eyes, I could see two figures moving down the aisle toward me. Walsh and another man in a train uniform. They stopped right next to my seat. "She's pretty," the younger man said quietly. "Shame. Don't," Walsh said sharply. "We stick to the plan. Nothing else." They stood there for what felt like forever, just watching me. I concentrated on keeping my breathing steady, fighting every instinct that told me to jump up and run. Finally, they moved on. I waited another 10 minutes before sitting up. The car was definitely empty now, and looking out the window, I couldn't see any lights that suggested we were approaching a city, just darkness and trees. That's when I noticed we were slowing down. The train came to a complete stop. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely alone, trapped in a locked train car somewhere in the mountains. I heard footsteps in the aisle again. I quickly lay down and closed my eyes. The footsteps got closer, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight. "Time to wake up, Miss Chen," Walsh said quietly. He knew my name. Hearing him say it in that empty car made it sound like a threat. "I know you're awake," he said. "I've been watching you for the last 10 minutes. I opened my eyes and sat up. Walsh was standing in the aisle with the younger conductor, both holding flashlights. "Where are we?" I asked. "Nowhere special," Walsh said. "Just a maintenance stop." "Where is everyone else?" "Everyone else got off in Albany. You slept through the stop." That was a lie. There had been people in the car when we left Portland. "I want to get off here," I said. Walsh smiled, but it wasn't the polite smile from earlier. This one was cold. "I'm afraid that's not possible." I was already standing up, moving toward the aisle. "I'm getting off this train right now." The younger conductor stepped forward, blocking my path. "Sit down," he said quietly. That's when I remembered something my dad had taught me. He'd been a police officer for 30 years, and he always said that if running isn't an option, you make noise. You make as much noise as possible. So I screamed. I screamed louder than I've ever screamed in my life. Both men flinched backward, and I bolted toward the back of the car, throwing myself against the locked door. "Help me! Somebody help me! I'm trapped!" The two men were coming after me. I spun around and ran toward the front, still screaming, pounding on that door with my fists. "Help! Please! Somebody help me!" And then, by some miracle, I heard a voice from the other side. "What's going on in there?" It was a man's voice, muffled but clear. "I'm trapped," I screamed. "These men locked me in here. Call the police." There was a loud click, and suddenly, the door swung open. On the other side was a man in his 60s wearing a train engineer's uniform. His name tag said Phil. Behind him was a younger passenger named Joe. "What the hell is going on here?" Phil demanded, looking past me at Walsh and the other conductor. Walsh had stopped in the middle of the aisle. His face had gone completely white. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "Bullshit," I said. "They've been moving me from car to car all night, isolating me from other passengers. When I woke up, everyone else was gone and the doors were locked." Phil looked at Walsh with recognition. "Joe," he said to the college kid behind him, "go radio for the police." "You don't understand," Walsh said. "She's been drinking." "I haven't had a drop of alcohol," I said. Phil stepped into the car, carrying a radio. "Walsh, you and Stevens need to come with me." "Now, this is all a big misunderstanding," Walsh said, backing away. No misunderstanding, Phil said firmly. We've been watching you, Walsh. The company has been getting reports for months about passengers going missing on overnight routes. Young women traveling alone. My knees almost gave out. Other women. This had happened to other women. Phil raised the radio. This is Engineer Phil Morrison. I need all available personnel to Car 7 immediately. We have a code blue situation. Within minutes, the card was full of train employees. They surrounded Walsh and Stevens, while Phil escorted me to a different car full of actual passengers. Phil explained that there had been an ongoing investigation into disappearances on several train routes. Young women would buy tickets and board trains, but they'd never arrive at their destinations. The company had been quietly placing undercover personnel on trains to catch whoever was responsible. If you hadn't screamed, he told me, we might never have caught them in the act. When we arrived in Seattle, the police were waiting. Walsh and Stevens were arrested immediately. Detective Mills told me they found evidence in a storage compartment on the train. Personal belongings from at least 6 different women. Wallets, jewelry, cell phones. I never did make it to my client meeting, but the client was incredibly understanding when I explained the situation. Walsh and Stevens were convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to life in prison. But they never admitted to what they did with those other women, and their bodies were never found. I got a letter from one of the victims' families about a year later. The mother of a 24-year-old named Sarah, who had disappeared 2 years before my incident. She thanked me for speaking up, for helping to catch the men who had taken her daughter. I still have that letter. Sometimes, when I'm having a bad day, I read it and remember that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you can also prevent it from happening to someone else. My name is Marcus, and this happened about 8 months ago. I was traveling from Denver to Salt Lake City on business, but my flight got cancelled due to weather. My company needed me back in Denver that night. So my boss suggested I take the train. The train was pretty full when I boarded. I found my seat next to a woman named Elena, who was probably in her 50s, heading to Denver to visit her daughter. First grandchild on the way. She was one of those people who could strike up a conversation with anyone. About an hour into the trip, we started climbing into the mountains. The route took us through some spectacular country steep grades, deep valleys, bridges that seemed to span impossible distances. That's when I noticed something odd. We'd been climbing steadily when the train started to slow down. Not just a little, we went from 40 miles per hour to maybe 15, then even slower. The train continued to slow until we were barely crawling, then stopped completely. The conductor's voice came over the intercom saying there was a minor delay. But after about 15 minutes, a crew member named Dan appeared, walking through our car with a clipboard. He looked stressed. More than stressed, he looked scared. "Excuse me," Elena called out. "Do you know how much longer we'll be stopped?" "Just a few more minutes," Dan said, but his voice was tight. He hurried past us, muttering into a radio. About 5 minutes later, Dan came back, walking quickly. I heard him say into the radio, "Need to know our exact position. How long before?" The radio crackled back, and Dan's face went white. "Are you sure?" he said. "How is that possible?" That's when we felt it, a slight jolt, like the train was settling. Then another jolt, stronger this time. And then, very slowly, we started to move. But we weren't moving forward, we were moving backward, and we were picking up speed. Elena grabbed my arm. "Marcus, what's happening?" Dan came running back through the car, shouting into his radio. "We have a runaway car. Repeat, we have a runaway car on the eastbound grade. Our brakes aren't responding." The word runaway sent a shock of terror through me. I looked out the window and watched the landscape starting to blur past. We were rolling backward down a mountain grade with no way to stop. Outside the window, the scenery was moving faster and faster. In the distance, I could see the main part of the train getting smaller as we rolled away from it. That's when the real panic started. People realized what was happening and began screaming. Dan was still trying to coordinate over the radio, but I could tell the situation was bad. "How long is this grade?" I asked Eleanor. She was pale but trying to stay composed. "Miles, maybe." Dan made an announcement over the intercom, his voice shaky but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a mechanical failure that has caused our car to separate from the main train. We're currently rolling backward, and our braking system is not responding. Please remain in your seats and brace yourselves." The speed was really picking up now. The car was swaying from side to side, and I could hear the wheels clicking over the rail joints faster and faster. Dan was back on the radio. "Control, what's our situation at the bottom of the grade?" The crackling response made my blood run cold. "Curve at mile marker 127. Speed limit 15 miles per hour. If you're doing more than that." There was a sharp curve at the bottom, designed for trains doing 15 miles per hour. We were probably doing 50 and accelerating. "Dan," I called out, "is there any way to manually engage the brakes?" He looked back at me with desperation in his eyes. "We've tried everything. The brake system is completely unresponsive. It's like someone disabled it. Like someone disabled it. This wasn't just a mechanical failure. This was sabotage." The car lurched suddenly. We were going even faster now, maybe 60 or 70 miles per hour. "How much further to the bottom?" someone shouted. "Maybe 3 miles, Dan said, checking his clipboard. 3 miles. At our current speed, that gave us maybe 4 minutes before we hit the curve." I got up and made my way to the front of the car, holding onto seat backs. There had to be something we could do. In the front vestibule, Dan was frantically checking controls. "The brake controls aren't responding," he said. I looked around and noticed something missing a panel that should have been there but wasn't. "Someone removed it," I said. Dan stared at the empty space. "That's impossible." But someone had, just like they disabled the automatic braking system. That's when I saw a red handle on the wall. "Emergency window," the label said. What if we opened some windows, created wind resistance? Dan thought about it, then nodded. He broke the plastic case and pulled the handle. Several windows throughout the car dropped down, and the roar of wind filled the space. The effect was immediate. We were still going fast, but I could feel the car starting to slow down as the wind resistance increased. "More!" I shouted. Dan ran toward the back, and within seconds, every window in the car was open. We were still going too fast, but it was working. The speedometer showed we were down to about 50 miles per hour. 1 mile, Dan shouted over the wind. The car started to sway more violently as we approached the curve. I could see it up ahead, a sharp left turn. "Hold on," Dan yelled. The car hit the curve at probably 45 miles per hour. For a moment, I thought we were going to make it. The car leaned hard but stayed on the track. Then the back end started to slide. The car tilted more and more until we were lying on our side, sliding along the gravel before finally coming to a stop. Miraculously, no one had been killed. There were broken bones, cuts, bruises, but everyone was alive. When rescue crews reached us 3 hours later, they brought disturbing news. The coupling hadn't failed mechanically. Someone had deliberately released it. The brake system had been sabotaged too. The FBI arrested a man named Peter Kowalski, a disgruntled former Amtrak employee, and his accomplice in the control room. They'd planned it perfectly: disconnect a car on the steepest grade, disable the brakes, and let gravity do the rest. They never expected anyone to survive. Elena and I stayed in touch after that. She made it to Denver eventually and was there when her granddaughter was born. She sends me pictures sometimes. I don't take trains anymore. I can't forget that feeling of helplessness, rolling backward down a mountain with no way to stop. My name is Kevin, and this happened just 6 months ago. I was 34, working as an accountant in Chicago. My daily routine was predictable: catch the 7:15 a.m. commuter train, work until 6 o'clock, then take the 6:45 train back to the suburbs. The day this happened was a Friday in November. I was running late, so instead of my usual 6:45 train, I caught the 7:30. This one was less crowded, which was nice. I found a seat easily and settled in with my phone. About 15 minutes into the trip, I noticed a guy sitting across the aisle. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a dark coat and baseball cap pulled low. What caught my attention was that he kept looking at me, not obviously just quick glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The guy had a small duffel bag and kept reaching into it, pulling out what looked like a water bottle. He'd take a sip, then put it back. He did this probably 6 or 7 times. About 25 minutes into the ride, I started feeling weird. Not sick exactly, but off. My throat felt dry and my eyelids were getting heavy. I figured I was just tired from a long week. The last thing I remember clearly was checking my phone. It was 8:02 p.m. Then everything gets fuzzy. I have fragments of memory after that, feeling like I was floating. Voices talking about me like I wasn't there. The sensation of being moved. But it's all disconnected, like trying to remember a dream. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in complete darkness. My head was pounding and everything felt disoriented, like waking up from anesthesia. I was lying on what felt like a train seat, but something was wrong. The air was stale and cold, and there was no sound of movement, no clickety-clack of wheels on tracks. I sat up slowly and tried to get my bearings. I was definitely in a train car, but the lights were off and it was pitch black outside the windows. I pulled out my phone. The screen was so bright it hurt my eyes. It was 3:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. My train ride was only 40 minutes. Even if I'd fallen asleep and missed my stop, the train would have reached the end of the line hours ago. I tried to stand up and immediately felt dizzy. Whatever had happened to me, I'd been drugged. That much was obvious now. I made my way down the aisle, using seat backs for support. The car was completely empty. At the front, I tried the door locked. The back door was locked too. Through the windows, I could see other train cars, but they were all dark and empty. In the distance, there were some lights that looked like they might be buildings or street lights, but I couldn't tell how far away they were. I was in some kind of rail yard. The panic started to set in then. I wasn't just on a delayed train. I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, locked in a car that wasn't in service. I tried calling 911, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off. That's when I started looking around more carefully, trying to figure out what had happened. On the floor near where I'd been sitting, I found a small syringe, empty, but it still smelled faintly of something chemical. Someone had drugged me and brought me here. But why? I spent the next hour trying everything I could think of. I checked every window, they were all locked. I tried breaking one with my shoe, but the glass was too thick. I yelled for help until my voice was hoarse, but no one came. Finally, around 5 a.m., I saw lights moving in the distance. A vehicle of some kind, heading toward the rail yard. I started banging on the windows and shouting again. The lights got closer. It was a pickup truck. It stopped near my car, and I could see a man in work clothes getting out. "Help!" I yelled, pounding on the glass. "I'm trapped in here." The man, his name tag said, Rick, when he got closer, looked genuinely surprised to see me. "What the hell?" he said, pulling out a radio. "Control, we've got a situation in car 47. There's a passenger trapped inside." It took another 30 minutes for someone with keys to arrive. When they finally got the door open, I practically fell out of the car. "How did you get in there?" Rick asked. I tried to explain about the train, about being drugged, but I could tell he thought I was either lying or crazy. "Son, that car's been sitting here for 2 days. It's scheduled for maintenance. There's no way you got here on a passenger train." But that was impossible. I remembered boarding the 7:30 train. I remembered the guy with the duffel bag, remembered feeling drowsy. The police arrived about an hour later. Detective Mills listened to my story with the kind of patience that told me he'd heard stranger things. "You said you remember a man with a bag on the train." I nodded. He kept drinking from a water bottle. I think he must have drugged me somehow. Any idea why someone would want to do that? I didn't have an answer. I was nobody special, just an accountant with a predictable routine. Detective Mills had me come to the station to look at surveillance footage from the train platform. The quality wasn't great, but there I was, boarding the 7:30 train just like I remembered. And there was the man with the duffel bag boarding right after me. "We're going to need you to work with a sketch artist," Detective Mills said. "And we'll want to run some blood tests, see what they gave you." The blood test came back positive for a cocktail of sedatives, enough to knock someone out for hours, but not enough to cause permanent damage. Over the next few weeks, Detective Mills called with updates. They'd identified the man from the sketch, a guy named Carl Morrison, with a history of assault and robbery. But when they went to arrest him, his apartment was empty. He'd disappeared. "We think you were targeted," Detective Mills told me. "Morrison's been riding the commuter trains looking for victims. Professional types with nice clothes, expensive phones. He drugs them, robs them, then dumps them somewhere remote." "But he didn't rob me," I said. "I still had my wallet, my phone, everything." Something spooked him. Maybe the rail yard worker was scheduled to come in earlier than expected. "You got lucky." Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated. The idea that someone had been watching me, studying my routine, planning to drug and rob me, it made me sick. I changed my commute after that. Started driving to work instead of taking the train. It added an hour to my day, but I couldn't bring myself to get back on that train. Sarah, my girlfriend, tried to be understanding, but I could tell she thought I was overreacting. "It was a random crime," she'd say. "Lightning doesn't strike twice." But it didn't feel random to me. The man had known exactly which train I'd be on, which car I usually sat in. He'd been watching me. About 3 months later, Detective Mills called with the news. They'd caught Morrison trying to drug another passenger on a different train line. This time, an off-duty cop had spotted him and intervened. He confessed to 5 similar incidents over the past year, Mills told me. You weren't his first victim, but you might have been his last if you hadn't been found when you were. Morrison was sentenced to 15 years. During his trial, I learned more about his methods. He'd spend weeks studying potential victims, learning their routines, figuring out the best time and place to strike. He'd drug them on the train, then have an accomplice help move them to a prepared location, usually an out-of-service train car in a remote rail yard. Most of his victims were robbed and left to wake up hours later with no memory of what happened, but some of them were never found. The prosecutor said, I was lucky the rail yard worker had come in early that night. Morrison's usual pattern was to leave victims locked in the cars for days, sometimes weeks, until they either died of dehydration or were found by accident. I still think about that night sometimes, about waking up in that dark, empty car, not knowing where I was or how I'd gotten there, about how easily someone can just disappear, become another missing person statistic. I take a different train now, at a different time, from a different station. I vary my routine, never sitting in the same car twice. Maybe that makes me paranoid, but I don't care. Because I know now that there are people out there who watch, who plan, who see other human beings as nothing more than opportunities. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and becoming their next victim is pure, random luck. Morrison is in prison now, but I know there are others like him, people who ride the trains looking for the perfect victim, waiting for the perfect opportunity. I was lucky once. I don't plan on giving anyone a second chance.